everybody, welcome to the Joy of Dwarven Painting. I'm Hamster. Today we're painting Cities Untold Lowtown, so let's begin. So let's start with the wood. These first couple steps are going to get you through almost all of the base wood on the floors, the walls, even the roofs, corner posts, so it's a great place to start. All of this is going to begin with a heavy dry brush of base wood by Corny. Because it's the first step, I like to use a nice big brush to get through this a little faster, especially if you're batch painting. For the dry brush technique, you're going to load up your brush and then rub most of the paint off on a paper towel until it looks a little scratchy like this, because we want this to just get picked up by the textured areas of the pieces. Sometimes I even fold it over and squeeze it out. This will beat up your brushes, but any kind of dry brushing will. So you kind of want to go against the grain and let it catch. You'll get the hang of how much paint you actually need for it to start catching. Here we go. And there's some accent bits here, but I'm not worried about being neat because we're just going to cover up the accent areas in later steps. You just want to get this base coat on fast. You may even need a couple passes, let this first one dry, just to get a little more opacity if you want more of that nice red-brown color. If it gets a little streaky, sometimes I change my direction just to sort of smooth it out as I go. And feel free to let it be a little patchy too, because it will give it sort of a ramshackle rundown look that I like. And remember, it always will appear a little bit brighter when it's wet, so you may come back to the first piece when it's dry and notice that you might need that second pass. Let's see. I'm gonna get a towel on the side here for all these. Get this done on the floor as well. And on some of the heavily textured areas, you can get away with leaving a little bit more paint on the brush. You'll really get a feel for it as you continue on your batch. So here I'm just dipping a little bit of paint from the brush, but I'm not wiping it off a whole lot. Just think of it as a perpendicular angle, letting the topmost textures grab the paint. And as long as you're not using a lot of pressure, you kind of want to think of a feather duster. You can just let it grab even some of that wet paint off to speed up the process. You'll get better at this with practice, of course. You can see as I'm going around the piece, my hands are grabbing some of that paint off. I don't even really mind that because I think it's going to add a little patchy variance. That might be kind of cool across a number of pieces. There's two more corner posts. I'll say if you're batch painting a bunch of these corner posts, be careful of pinching like this. I'm doing it here because it's the easiest way to get the whole piece. But in my experience, your hand will start cramping up. So be careful of doing the pinch thing over too many pieces. And there is a little wood texture on the inside of these as well. Don't forget that. So for the next step on the wood, we're just going to highlight that base coat that we just did, adding a little bit of stucco into the base wood paint. Probably a little bit less than 50-50, but that's a good place to start. It's about half and half. So here we're going to be using the same dry brush technique, but you want an even lighter touch. You want to cover less area here. So you're doing the same motion, just make sure your pressure is light and just pay a little more attention to how much coverage you're getting. But overall, it's pretty much the same step. But you'll start to see more of that texture come out. And again, I might even leave it a little patchy. Just think about having even less paint on your brush than the last step. Rub more of it off on your towel. And have even less pressure. And that's it for the basic wood scheme, but a number of the Lowtown pieces have some accents on them, so we're going to go over some of those next. The first wood accents we're going to look at are the lighter colored woods, and it's going to start with an overall base coat of those areas with olive dry brush. So I have a nice pointy round brush, and we'll get some corny olive. Maybe, I think this one's new. Oh. Doesn't necessarily even have to be fully opaque because we're going to dry brush over it later. So as long as it gets in those recesses as a kind of shadow, then you should be okay. So if you're doing a large batch, I don't think you have to do more than one coat, but you can if you'd like, of course. Just make sure here, when you dip your brush, you don't want like a huge blob of paint. Just twist off the excess, pull back and twist. So you have a good amount of paint on your brush and not too much. So for the last step of this accent, we're going to do a light dry brush of stucco over the top. I'm using my small round brush again, just because this is a small detail. It will start to damage the tip, so have a couple of old brushes aside for this. Utilize the perpendicular angle. You can see I went out of bounds a little bit. I'm just going to use my finger to rub that off while it's still wet. There might be a slight mark there, but it's the same color that's in the base wood dry brush mix that we did, so it shouldn't be hugely visible and might add some variance, in fact. If it's not quite bright enough, you can always add something like stone edge dry brush into this mix if you want a little lighter, or any ivory that you may have. Or even just a second pass of the stucco. Go back another additional time here. Utilizing a perpendicular angle just so that texture does the work for us and catches the paint off the brush. Really light pressure here. I'm hardly pressing down at all. Just going side to side. And that's your light accent. Now, other Lowtown pieces have a dark wood accent. So what I would suggest is base coating those areas in black. If you get a dark enough mix, you can probably eliminate this step and get away with it. But usually I like to darken out those areas just to have that shadowy start. And even when you're doing a full opaque base coat, you can still utilize the perpendicular angle strategy. These are a little bit raised, so we don't have to be neat. We just have to find that magic angle to let the piece pull the paint off where we want it. If you want, you can use the tip here to get this little bevel. Even in this case, it's really light pressure, because if you press down, the tip will start to spread out, and that's how you kind of go outside the bounds. So again, load your brush, twist off the excess, get that sort of magic angle of where you want it to grab, and keep your pressure light. Notice too how I have different points of contact for my precision. You don't have to have steady hands, you have to steady your hands. I have my forearm on the table, my wrist on the table. I'm anchoring with this finger. If you're floating, that's when you're going to get imprecise and shaky. So you want this kind of anchoring here too. The second step of the dark accent, I'm just adding some olive dry brush to black. You can get away with mixing almost any greenish brown color in here because it's going to end up really dark as well, but that's how I mix it up. You kind of think of a green black. This will be a dry brush, so I'm taking off most of the paint. So this highlight is not going to be as bright as the highlight we did on the base wood sections, and that's good because we want these areas to be dark and contrast from a tabletop view from far away. Sometimes it looks like we want to do a little more when we're holding it close, when we're painting it, but trust me, this is going to add to the contrast of your pieces across a large build on the table. And there's your dark accent. The last accent that we do for the factory scheme is on the roofs in these little middle sections of each of the wood. If you like how your roofs look, you can get away with skipping this step, but I just do a dark wash with black just to add a little contrast because there's already a lot of wood across the walls. So if you have these sections of your roofs exposed, it's nice to have a little bit of variance. So all we're going to do is take the same black paint, but take a brush full of water and just mix it into the paint to thin it out so that it will flow into these recesses. We don't want it to be opaque. That's what makes this a wash. It's going to run sort of into the cracks, and it's pretty transparent and runny, so you can see. So once we have it mixed up, we'll just put it in here, and it stays pretty wet, so you can even push it around a little bit as you go. Push it toward the outermost cracks, but it will just darken up this area to contrast with the surrounding wood and all the wood walls that will be in your build. You can even rinse off your brush, leave a little water in it, and push it around that way too. You don't want it to start pooling too much, but it has a little bit of working time. And that's it for your rustic wood. Let's paint some roofs. So for the dark rooftops, we're going to start with a mix that's turns into kind of a purple black. So I have a purple here that I've mixed with black and a little bit of white to desaturate it. If you have Picorni blue and red, you can mix that into your black and white. But you're just looking for a dark color that has a purplish identity, but is close to black. And this is just an all-over base coat. The end result will have it mostly in the recesses, so make sure you kind of poke into these shingles. Get your paint in there. Careful of the wood that you've already painted on the sides. But as long as you kind of angle your piece perpendicular to your brush, you should be okay with that. The next step for the dark roofs will be a dry brush of olive dry brush, and we're going to do 2 passes, one lightly all over, and then just sort of hit a heavier note on the bottoms of the shingles to sort of make a little gradient. But it's still just an easy 2 passes of dry brushing. And then one more pass just to make it a little more opaque on the bottoms. Now to finish off the dark roofs, we're just going to do the metal that's on the top. It's just silver mixed with a touch of black. Buckhorny silver is pretty bright, so we just want a slightly darker silver right across the top, and then opaque base coat. That's it for the dark roofs. Let's move on to the other version. So for your green roofs, the start is very simple. It's an all-over base coat of deep water green. Is that what it's called? Yes. The next step is an all-over dry brush with about a half and half mix of Bubbles Blue and that deep water green. And lastly, here you can finish off your green roofs with a very light dusting of the desaturated deep water green. So we're gonna put in a little stone edge dry brush just to brighten it up and knock down a little bit of this teal. Very light pressure here to finish it off. We still want it to have some of that bluishness underneath, but just sort of top it off with a dusty highlight. For this top metal part of your green roofs, we're going to do a copper bronze mix. I have golden brand copper, and I'm throwing in about half and half Picorni bronze. And that's it for green roofs. Let's move on to some cobblestone. So to begin painting cobblestone, you want to base coat the cobblestone section with black. So on your seawall pieces that have just a section of cobblestone, you only need to do it on the cobblestone part. You want to make sure this gets into those deep cracks as well. The next cobblestone step will be an all-over dry brush and sort of a dark blue gray. So take your base gray from Picorni and add just a touch of blue and black to darken it and cool it off. You don't need a super heavy touch with this because you want it to remain pretty dark. We're going to continue highlighting as we go here. The next cobblestone step is a dry brush with a mix of about 50-50 stucco and olive dry brush. And you're going to focus on the center of each cobblestone square. So we're going to kind of feather and bloom it out as we dry brush. So we're going to go each one square at a time. Kind of going around for a second pass on some of the ones that didn't get quite as much. See these first ones here quite a bit brighter, so I'll just touch some of these up like so. And it's okay if they're a little patchy too, because that would happen as your cobblestones have been hit by the elements over time in an old city. If you want a little impact too, you can even get a little wet paint on there and then rub it off. You see it makes it a little more opaque, but still kind of rugged. So I'm focusing on an even smaller area of the center in this second pass. It's not super precise, I'm just kind of eyeballing it, but making it brightest sort of in the center of each square. Now to finish off your cobblestones, you're going to take the same mix and just do a very light dry brush to dust off the entire piece to make it kind of cohesive. So you're using the same color as you just did in the center of the cobblestones, but we're just giving it a once over to sort of make it cohesive. This will barely show up. You want a small amount of paint and light pressure, so it's not going to be as bright as the center of the cobblestones. But it will still pick out some of that nice texture. So there's barely any on my brush here. Now that you've finished the cobblestones, these seawalls have a couple extra steps. So on the non-cobblestone sides, you're going to dry brush these stones that you did not base coat black. This is just the Dwarvenite dungeon gray color. You're just going to do an all-over dry brush of stone edge dry brush to highlight it. Next, we're going to do the little bits of moss that are on the walls. So this is just going to be a base coat of shallow water green to start. And here we are kind of coloring in more precise areas. As long as you use a light touch, light pressure, just let the texture of that shape grab the paint off the brush. Since it's raised up off the stone, as long as you utilize that perpendicular angle, let that texture of the piece do the work for you for this precision. You can see by doing that, this brush is pretty blunt and old, and we're still able to get these areas pretty nicely. Right, hair dry that, and we got one more step, and we're done. To finish off these moss patches, we're going to do a light dry brush of moss green. And while you're doing this moss green step, we're going to do my favorite part to finish it off, because I love weathering effects. We're going to add some of this moss green to the bottoms of the walls where the waters have been crashing against the wall for ages and adding sediment and algae and stuff like that. Doesn't that just add some great atmosphere and kind of history to the look of the piece? You can almost smell the sea breeze. Maybe that's because I just went on a fishing trip. And that's it for cobblestone and seawalls. This should get you through each of those pieces that include the cobblestone texture and the seawall section as well. And that's it. Thank you all so much for watching. Please join me on our Twitch channel at dwarvenforgelive for Hamster's Hobby Hang, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. And come on into our Discord. We have a great community that can help answer your painting questions, share builds, and have lots of fun conversation. We'll see you next time.